Ned Stark stood in the great hall of the Red Keep as the echoes of mourning still drifted through the corridors. King Robert Baratheon's final breath had been drawn, but days passed. Yet his spirit lingered in the uneasy hush that settled over the castle. Tapestries stirred in a faint, draft-like breath as the servants went about their duties with lowered eyes. It was no secret to anyone that troubles brewed beneath the polished floors and the stone walls. The realm had lost its king, but it still had a king's hand. No, more than that. Ned Stark was now Lord Protector, regent in all but name to the boy prince, who by rights should inherit the Iron Throne. Yet each morning, Ned wondered how long such a fragile arrangement could hold. He could feel his old friend's absence like a missing limb. Robert had been so full of life, so bursting with laughter and ribald jests. Now, that laughter was gone, replaced by hushed plotting in corners, and the glances of the Lannisters that flickered over him like the silver edge of a drawn dagger. More than once, Ned told himself he was a poor choice for intrigues. He longed for the crisp air of the North, the surety of Winterfell's traditions, and the dependable honesty of men and women who spoke their mind plainly. But here he stood, in the heart of the South's confusion, pledged to protect the rightful heir. He had discovered secrets in these halls, secrets that might yet tear the realm apart. For now, he told himself, he must hold them close and do as Robert had asked. From his vantage at the dais, Ned looked down upon the bustling hall. Lords and courtiers bowed as he passed. Some were sincere, others held sly malice behind their smiles. Each day, he felt the weight of the crown's responsibilities pressing harder. The words, Lord Protector, echoed in his mind. A solemn vow he had sworn upon Robert's deathbed. And though the moment had not been one of pure clarity, Robert's blood-stained words had come in gasps and confusion. Ned accepted. He would guide the realm until young Joffrey came of age. Yet he could not forget what he'd learned. Joffrey was no true son of Robert's. The burden of that knowledge weighed heavy as an entire kingdom on his shoulders. In the gloom of that first evening, he withdrew to the Hand's Solar, a high-ceilinged chamber stuffed with ledgers, accounts, and the boar's head that Robert had once insisted be brought to him. Oil lamps flickered. The dull light cast shadows that danced across worn parchment and half-unfurled scrolls. Small council meetings came and went, but the real shaping of policy now happened behind closed doors. Varys, Littlefinger, Pycelle. They whispered in corners, each wanting to charm or coerce the new Lord Protector. But Ned gave them little encouragement. He only studied the accounts, read the letters from the provinces, tried to bring his steady northern sense to the chaos. Sansa and Arya were still in the castle, though with each passing day, Ned wondered if they should be sent away for their safety. His elder daughter dreamt of queens and courts, of gallant knights and pleasing songs. Arya, on the other hand, twisted like a wisp in the wind, so restless that Ned could scarcely keep track of her. She found her way everywhere, from the kitchens to the stables, to the dusty halls leading to the dungeons. Ned sometimes caught glimpses of her from a distance, running off with her sword lesson instructor, a Braavosi man called Syrio Forel. The comfort of seeing them daily reminded him why he needed to hold firm here. If he fled, if he abdicated his new responsibilities, what would become of his family and the kingdom? One late afternoon not long after Robert's passing, the Lady Cersei Lannister arrived unannounced at the Solar. She swept in wearing black robes of mourning, though they were as elegantly tailored as any queen's apparel. Her golden hair lay in thick waves upon her shoulders, and her green eyes shone with silent challenge. Her voice, tinted with courtesy's edge, inquired politely after the realm's business. Ned met her gaze without flinching. He knew the cunning behind those eyes. He could almost feel the unspoken threats lacing the air. Yet he chose his words as carefully as a soldier places his steps through a field of traps. "My Lord Protector," she called him, a faint smile curving her lips. So many titles for one man. She expressed a desire to help him manage the transition, to console her grieving children. But Ned knew she was testing him. He recognized in her a fear of losing power. The fear that he might unravel all she'd built to secure her son's claim. He had half a mind to say that he already knew the truth of Joffrey's parentage, but duty and caution held him silent. This was not the hour to proclaim it. Not while her father, Lord Tywin, commanded armies and gold. Not while so many men in the city might favor the Lannisters. Instead, he spoke of the boy king's best interests. He spoke of unity, of maintaining peace for the good of the realm. He hoped it was enough to forestall open conflict. She left with that same smile, curtsying almost gracefully, yet leaving behind a lingering disquiet in the air. Ned exhaled and realized the sweat on his palms. Before him, the scattered parchments on his desk seemed to accuse him. Lines of debt that Robert had incurred, promises to the Iron Bank, demands from merchants, all of which threatened to drown the kingdom's treasure. The realm was not just threatened by the question of succession or the Lannisters' ambitions, but by the weight of its own mismanagement. None of it was beyond Ned's determination, but he sometimes felt like a man bailing water from a sinking ship with no oarsmen to row it ashore. In the days that followed, he committed to reorganizing the city watch. Littlefinger said that the gold cloaks were stretched thin, that their loyalties were easily bought, that if trouble came, they might not hold. Ned had never been comfortable with bribery, so he tried to put new men in place, men he believed might value honor over coin. He assigned tasks to those who gave him the impression of honesty, though he knew that in King's Landing, illusions came as easily as exhaled breath. Even so, it was worth trying. He wanted to ensure that, should Cersei move against him, at least some of the city guard would hold firm to the crown's rightful regent. Meanwhile, Joffrey often resided in his chambers, or occasionally he made an appearance in court. He was a boy caught in a sudden swirl of power. His temper flared in humiliating ways. He barked orders at servants who had known him as the spoiled prince. Now, they jumped at his every word, aware that any slight could end in punishment. Ned could see the boy was hungry for recognition. Yet there was a brittleness to him. He was prone to outbursts, especially when the weight of being called "Your Grace" tugged on him like a cloak that didn't fit. Ned tried in a handful of official sessions to guide Joffrey gently, explain that to be king is to serve. Joffrey's eyes flickered at that word, serve. He looked as though he'd never heard such a notion. Sansa watched the young king with a mixture of awe and confusion, clinging to the idea of courtly love, of a gracious sovereign. If only, Ned thought, reality matched his daughter's illusions. She was infatuated with the romanticism that the songs had promised her. But Ned knew the truth could break her heart. Even so, he did not want to strip away her innocence too soon. He merely kept a vigilant eye on Joffrey's behavior. Whenever the boy's cruelty surfaced, Ned felt anger burn under his skin. For Sansa's sake, for the sake of the realm, he prayed Joffrey would not prove a tyrant. Yet deep down, he harbored little hope. Winter was approaching, both for the north and for the entire kingdom, he often reminded himself. His father's words echoed faintly in the back of his mind. A lord must learn to protect his own. Each day's chore was burdened with the knowledge that, although he was Lord Protector in name, many still eyed him as an intruder. A northerner wearing the capital's power for a short time, until the Lannisters decided otherwise. If war came, Ned wondered how quickly the alliances would crumble. The Tyrells in the Reach were quiet. The Greyjoys on the Iron Islands had their own ambitions. The Martells in Dorne still nursed old grudges. And the Vale, Jon Arryn's son, was little more than a child, protected by the fortress that soared among the clouds. Would they come to the aid of King's Landing if the Lannisters or some other threat marched? Ned saw no easy path. The Seven Kingdoms seemed a tapestry of friction, and the day might come when one frayed thread would unravel the rest. Yet he tried to instill calm in his daily dealings. Part of this involved restoring some sense of trust in the monarchy. He was not Robert, with that boisterous manner and skill for forging friendships with noblemen through hunts and feasts. But Ned listened. He took an interest in the petitions brought before the throne. He strove to settle disputes fairly. He supported wise measures, such as ensuring the city's grain supplies were stored properly. If winter should prove harsh, the city might face famine. And he let it be known that the new regency was not blind to the plight of the small folk. That alone won him some goodwill, though it also drew the scorn of certain high lords who found such concerns beneath them. On a crisp morning, He ventured out into the courtyard with Arya trailing after him. The practice yard was alive with the clash of steel, as knights sparred and soldiers drilled. Sandor Clegane, the hound, stood off to one side, arms folded, eyes forever glowering under that scarred visage. He watched as the men labored, occasionally barking an insult or a curt piece of advice. He acknowledged Ned's presence with a stiff nod. Nearby, a few gold cloaks tested their skill with short swords. The clang reverberated off the stone walls, underscoring the gravity of the times. Ned recalled the simpler training yards at Winterfell where his children had learned the rudiments of swordplay. He wondered if they would ever return to that life. Duty was a chain, and at present, it bound him to King's Landing. Arya had her wooden practice sword in hand, one she'd whittled down to a nub from constant training with Syrio. She offered her father a smile. It was the sort of smile that reminded him of her mother, Cat, back at Winterfell with Bran and Rickon, who still needed her guidance. It pained Ned sometimes to think of them separated, especially now. If the worst happened, would he even have the chance to see them again? He knelt and adjusted Arya's stance. She was growing so fast. He could see her arms had toned from practice, her face more determined. She asked him, in a hushed voice, if they would stay in King's Landing forever. He answered that he hoped not, that they would one day return home. But for now, their place was here. She scrunched her face in that way she did when she was confused or frustrated, but she did not argue. As the day wore on, Ned found himself conferring with Sir Barristan Selmy, the Lord Commander of the Kingsguard, a man of quiet dignity and storied loyalty. Sir Barristan offered insight into the boy king's moods, the movements of the Lannisters, and the morale of the guards. He spoke of how the city whispered in the aftermath of Robert's death, whispers of a bore that had been too conveniently placed, whispers of those who believed the king had been betrayed, rumors that, perhaps, Ned Stark would find himself disposed of, one way or another, if he delved too deep into Lannister secrets. Ned gazed on Sir Barristan's earnest face, remembering how Robert had once counted on this knight to guard his very life. It was a grim truth that neither Sir Barristan nor the Kingsguard had been able to save Robert in his final hunt. But Ned saw no reason to doubt the old knight's sincerity now. He valued the man's counsel. That evening, he took supper with Sansa and Arya in his private quarters. The meal was simple: roasted hen and bread, a few vegetables grown in the Crownlands fields. Wine for Ned, watered wine for the girls, though Arya grimaced at its taste. Sansa spoke in sweet, lilting tones of the day's small excitement, some jousting practice in the courtyard, a young knight newly arrived from the Reach. She felt certain he was the epitome of chivalry. Arya rolled her eyes but said little, instead focusing on pulling stray bits of roasted hen from the bone. Ned listened to his daughters with a mild smile. He welcomed these ordinary moments. Even as the weight of court politics lay upon him, he tried to remember that fatherhood was a duty as vital as any decree he might sign. He teased Arya about her devouring the hen like a wild direwolf. She responded by sticking out her tongue. Sansa admonished her sister for being so unladylike, but Ned only chuckled. Then he caught himself. Laughter felt like a fleeting visitor in these halls of suspicion. But if there was one place for it, it was here, at a small table with two of his children. Later that night, when the sky had turned dark and the torches in the corridors outside guttered, Ned sat alone with a single candle flickering. In his hands lay an old parchment, bearing the words that named him Lord Protector until Joffrey's majority. Robert had pressed the seal down with trembling hand. That last day, the king had muttered about who should rule, about how Ned should handle the matter of the queen. He had insisted on a line in the document about "my son," but in his delirium, had never said the words clearly. Ned, in a moment of crisis, had adjusted it. He replaced "my son Joffrey" with "my heir." That distinction weighed heavily on him now. Here was the proof of Robert's final intention. Yet Ned had not used it to oust Joffrey or Cersei. He feared the realm might tear itself apart if he did. The letter was a last piece on a board crowded with potential moves. He studied it as though it might speak to him and offer a path out of the labyrinth. A knock at the door startled him. He slid the parchment away, smothering the candle, so that only the glow of moonlight remained. Through the threshold stepped Varys, the master of whisperers, face as unreadable as ever. Even in the partial darkness, Ned could see the glimmer in his eyes. Varys apologized for the late intrusion, voice soft and apologetic. He'd come bearing news of certain rumors drifting in from across the sea. Something about the Targaryen girl, Daenerys, who might yet pose a threat. Ned grimaced. Was this realm never free of ancient grudges and claims? Varys spoke in hushed tones of how some spy masters believed she was gathering allies. A cow? A marriage? Possible unborn heirs. Ned felt exhaustion creeping over him. War could come from any direction, but at least that threat was far away, beyond the sea. Their immediate concern was the Lannisters, the fractious realm, and making sure that King's Landing did not collapse into violent chaos. In the days that followed, Ned presided over court sessions with Joffrey perched on the throne. Sometimes, the boy hardly hid his disdain for the dull matters of state. Taxes, roads, disputes between minor lords. He'd shift and squirm on the Iron Throne, occasionally snapping at those who spoke too long. Ned learned to guide the conversation, quickening the pace when Joffrey's temper flared. He offered short judgments or, if possible, deflected certain issues to the next small council meeting. On a few occasions, Joffrey demanded that those who displeased him be thrown to the dungeons. Ned, trying to keep the peace, would talk him down gently, reminding him that justice must be measured. The glances from the courtiers said everything. They knew who truly ran the realm at present, but they also knew that once Joffrey was of age, nothing would temper him. The boy king's scowl as Ned overruled him made that fear all the more tangible. Cersei's presence in these sessions was intermittent. When she did appear, she would sit quietly near the throne, watchful as a cat. Her eyes rarely left Ned, but sometimes they flicked around the hall, as though taking note of those who supported him. She rarely spoke, though. If Joffrey grew too reckless, she would lean in and whisper something that seemed to soothe him into grudging patience. A silent battle of wills grew between Ned and the Queen, but it never erupted into open confrontation. Not yet. Rumors came to Ned of gold cloaks, receiving quiet sums from Littlefinger or others. If it was Littlefinger alone, Ned might have tried to put a stop to it, but the truth was that coin greased many hinges in King's Landing. If he removed that oil, the entire city might grind to a stubborn, unmanageable standstill. So Ned had to allow certain practices while trying to hold the balance. Another rumor, more alarming, spoke of the Lannister men in the Westerlands amassing arms as though for war. Lord Tywin was said to be displeased that Ned Stark had any authority over his grandson. That night, Ned wrote a carefully worded letter to Lord Tywin, reminding him that Robert's final orders must be respected. He couched it in the politest language possible, urging unity for the good of the realm. But he doubted it would quell the lion's roar. If indeed Tywin Lannister planned to move. To distract himself from constant tension, Ned sometimes walked the city streets in disguise, accompanied by a few trusted men. This was not typical for a hand, much less a Lord Protector, but he found it necessary to sense the city's mood. He wore a simple cloak, an unremarkable sword at his hip, while the gold cloaks who trailed him kept to the shadows. From the Mudgate to Flea Bottom, he surveyed the shops, the beggars, the petty thieves. Fishmongers hollered, bakers hawked stale bread at inflated prices, and children with dirty faces scampered about. He remembered Robert's words once, "The city will devour itself if it grows too large." Ned saw desperation in the faces of the poor, a hunger that might turn to anger if left unchecked. He passed by a sept under reconstruction, with a handful of devout sisters offering prayers for the late king's soul. A drunken man cursed King Robert for spending the treasury on feasts instead of feeding the small folk. In a corner, a whispered conversation speculated that the new king was no Baratheon at all, that it was all some cursed arrangement. Ned tried not to flinch at hearing the rumor so brazenly repeated on the street. It confirmed that the realm teetered on the brink of knowledge that could incite a civil war. He resolved again to keep the peace as best he could, to gather the forces of justice before chaos consumed them all. Night fell by the time he made his way back to the Red Keep. As he climbed the torchlit steps, he realized how bone-weary he was. Sleep came rarely these days. When he finally slipped into his chambers, he found Sansa waiting in the antechamber. Tears stained her cheeks. She spoke in a trembling voice about Joffrey. He had slighted her at the evening feast, mocking her father's accent, and the idea that the North was savage territory. The king had demanded she sing for him, but she'd faltered, and the humiliation stung her pride. Ned sighed and placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. This was the reality of tying his family's fate to the throne. He reminded her that sometimes kings could be unkind, but a true lady must hold her composure. It pained him to offer such counsel, but it was all he had. She nodded, stiff-lipped, trying to maintain her dignity. He realized then that Sansa might be learning the lessons of King's Landing faster than she ever learned the courtesy lessons in Winterfell. He dismissed her gently, and she left, taking her sadness with her. Alone, Ned sank into a chair near the window. The moon hung over Blackwater Bay, painting ripples of silver on the inky water. The odor of the city drifted on the wind. Salt, fish, the stink of too many souls crowded within the walls. He wondered about the future. If a day came when the Lannisters forced his hand, would the other great houses rally to protect the rightful line of succession? Or the truth, which was Robert's line, was not actually continued in Joffrey? Stannis Baratheon was the rightful heir by blood, if Robert's children were false. Ned had sent a raven to Dragonstone, entreating Stannis to come forth, but no reply had arrived. Renly Baratheon, Robert's younger brother, hovered in the shadows of the court, biding his time. Could Ned trust him, or would Renly stake his own claim? So many swirling possibilities left Ned feeling as though the tides might soon drown them all. Weeks passed in this delicate dance. At times, the realm's routine threatened to lull Ned into complacency. But he remembered that in King's Landing, the moment you let down your guard was the moment you lost. He continued to press the small council to pay off some of the realm's debts, or at least renegotiate. He quietly replaced certain keepers of the keys, certain stewards, with people loyal to the crown as an institution rather than to any one family. He also kept a sharp watch on the Lannister members of the household. Jaime Lannister was away, officially in the field with the king's armies, though he was no longer Kingsguard after Robert's passing, or in any active sense. Yet even in his absence, Jaime's name carried weight. Cersei, on the other hand, grew bolder in her manner. She ordered more lavish feasts for Joffrey, orchestrating events that emphasized his status as king, pushing Ned from the central vantage point. Ned allowed it, reasoning that it was better to let them wear themselves out with displays than to risk confrontation. He knew many of the lesser lords who had come to glean favor from the new king found themselves caught in an awkward position. They recognized Ned's authority, but they also wanted to curry favor with the Lannisters. The result was an uneasy stalemate, with Ned presiding over official matters and Cersei steering social and ceremonial events. All the while, the seeds of discontent scattered across the land. Word came from the Riverlands that Gregor Clegane, Tywin's bannerman, was harassing smaller holdfasts, searching for traitors. Another letter hinted that Lord Walder Frey was uncertain whom to support, now that the Tully alliance with House Stark seemed overshadowed by the tension in King's Landing. Ned felt the old alliances trembling. He spent hours writing letters to old friends, to houses he trusted, urging them to keep the peace and remember their oaths. He tried to cloak his words in as much neutrality as possible, but the meaning was clear. In the event of crisis, he wanted their swords on the side of justice. Sansa's betrothal to Joffrey remained intact. Ned toyed with the idea of breaking it, but if he did so too openly, he risked tipping the Lannisters into immediate aggression. As loath as he was to bind his house to that boy, he did not see a ready alternative. Whenever he looked at Sansa, though, a pang shot through his heart. She was entangled in a net of illusions and dangerous realities. He wished there was some safer path for her, but he saw no easy route to extricate her from this web. One afternoon, as sunlight poured through the stained glass windows of the throne room, Ned listened to a dispute between two lesser lords. Joffrey was supposed to be presiding, but the boy quickly grew bored. He drummed his fingers on the steel of the throne, leaning over to whisper with the hound or to sneer at courtiers. Then he abruptly stood, addressing the hall. He demanded a tournament be held in memory of his father, King Robert, to show the realm's strength and splendor. Ned nearly choked at the mention of expense. The treasury could ill afford another lavish tourney. But Joffrey looked at him defiantly, and the hall turned to see how the Lord Protector would respond to the king's demand. Ned forced a respectful bow, and quietly reminded his grace of the financial strain. Perhaps a smaller, more modest event would suffice. Joffrey's face reddened. He insisted that the memory of King Robert deserved the greatest of tournaments, with generous prizes for the champions, so that all would speak of it throughout the Seven Kingdoms. Sensing a brewing tempest, Cersei stepped forward from her seat near the dais, placing a calming hand on the boy's arm. She suggested that the matter be discussed further in the small council, to ensure the best possible tribute. Joffrey hesitated, still seething, but relented under his mother's gaze. Ned exhaled, grateful for at least that small containment. Nonetheless, as the day wore on, he received petition after petition from knights eager to prove themselves in a grand display. The realm might be in mourning, but ambition never stopped. And if a large tournament were held, it would draw lords from every corner. That could be an opportunity for alliances to form, or for the seeds of rebellion to sprout. Ned could scarcely keep track of the undercurrents swirling around the notion of a grand tourney. He recognized in it both a threat and a chance. If well managed, perhaps it could unify the realm behind the memory of Robert. If mismanaged, it might spark the violence so many dreaded. As night approached, Ned found himself stepping onto the balcony that overlooked the Blackwater again. The salt breeze brushed against his face, carrying a faint odor of the tanneries. He closed his eyes and for a moment pictured Winterfell. The God's Wood, the ancient heart tree, the hush of snowdrifts. He saw the faces of Robb, Bran, Rickon, and Cat, pictured their daily lives far away. Did they worry for him as he worried for them? He hoped that if a conflict erupted, the North could stand firm. Robb was young yet but strong in will. He had loyal bannermen. But Ned wanted peace. He never asked for the burden of the realm's highest seat of power, but it had been laid upon him. When he left the balcony, he discovered a sealed letter on the table in his room. It bore the sigil of House Arryn. He broke the seal to find a brief message from Lysa Arryn in the Eyrie, widow of Ned's old mentor Jon Arryn. The letter was vague, full of elliptical hints that suggested new revelations about what had happened to her late husband, how he discovered something about the succession. Ned's jaw tightened. He had already learned much from searching Jon Arryn's papers, from speaking with certain acquaintances. But if Lysa had further details, it might strengthen his hand if the time came to accuse the Lannisters publicly. However, she was a fearful woman, prone to seeing enemies everywhere. Ned knew traveling to the Eyrie would be impossible for him now. He was anchored in King's Landing by the seat of Regency. He wondered if he could persuade Lysa to come south, or to send more conclusive evidence. He penned a cautious reply, not wanting the letter to fall into the wrong hands. Thus, the cycle of worry continued. Each dawn brought fresh concerns. Each dusk brought the promise of uneasy slumber. In stolen moments, Ned would take Arya for short walks, or sit with Sansa to review her posture or harp lessons. He tried to infuse some normalcy into their lives. He wondered how long he could maintain this facade. The courtiers played their games of flattery. Varys glided in and out, delivering half-truths and riddles. Littlefinger offered sly witticisms, hinting at alliances that might protect Ned, if only he would choose a side. Pycelle droned on about the realm's history, offering no more substance than dust. Through it all, Ned felt the North in his bones, that part of him that demanded honesty and direct action. Yet he forced himself to move cautiously. This was King's Landing after all. One day, a raven arrived bearing news from the North. There had been a brief clash with wildlings beyond the wall. The Night's Watch had taken casualties, but more alarming was mention of the strange sightings, men claiming to have seen the others. Ned read the words twice, heart heavy. Could it be? If winter truly came with the old terrors, the realm would need unity more than ever. Petty squabbles over the throne would doom them all. He considered telling the small council, but he feared mockery or dismissal. So he waited, sending a note to Lord Commander Mormont, promising more men when possible. It felt like a hollow promise. With so many troubles at hand, the notion of sending forces to the wall seemed distant, no matter how crucial it was. Days turned into weeks. The pace of the city quickened with the approach of the rumored tournament. Ned reluctantly approved a smaller budget than Joffrey wanted, though it was still significant. Joffrey sulked, but allowed the arrangement. The lists were drawn. Knights, freeriders, and sellswords began to arrive, each seeking coin or glory. The city swelled with visitors, adding to the tension. Whispers of possible violence circulated. Taverns filled with wandering swordsmen, some of them possibly brigands in mail. Ned remained vigilant. He organized additional gold cloaks to patrol the streets. But coin was short, and morale was uncertain. Each day he expected some new conflict or an attempt on his life. Amid all this turmoil, an unexpected moment of respite arrived in the form of a letter from Winterfell, bearing good tidings from Cat. She wrote of a bountiful harvest, of Rickon's first attempts to ride a pony, of Bran continuing to heal from his fall, though still with limited mobility. She did not speak much of politics. Perhaps she believed Ned was safer than he actually was. Or perhaps she was more concerned with the North's own challenges. For a fleeting heartbeat, Ned felt a pang of longing so strong it stole his breath. He yearned to be done with this city and all its burdens. But he was the Lord Protector, and Robert's memory was not so easily set aside. If Ned abandoned his post now, if he declared Joffrey illegitimate, the Seven Kingdoms would be engulfed in civil war. Innocent blood would spill. The Lannisters would counter with their gold and their armies. Houses uncertain of their loyalties might seize the chance for power. Chaos would bleed the land. That was not the honorable course, not unless forced by dire necessity. So Ned endured. He thought of his father, his brother, how they had once believed in justice, how that belief had cost them their lives. Yet Ned had inherited that same sense of duty, and he would not forsake it now. Cersei's final gambit had yet to be played, he knew. She tolerated him for the moment, likely calculating that removing him too soon could spark backlash. But a day would come when she might risk it. Perhaps she believed that once Joffrey was crowned fully, the realm would accept it. Or perhaps she was waiting for Tywin to gather enough strength to override any who would dispute the boy's claim. Ned tried not to dwell on it too deeply. Better to keep watch, to strengthen the city's defenses, to secure alliances quietly, and to do right by the crown's people in the meantime. One evening, a messenger arrived at Ned's door. He carried a simple piece of parchment with a scrawling signature. It read, "We must speak on matters of utmost urgency. Come to the Godswood under cover of darkness. Signed, a friend." Ned frowned, suspecting a trap, or possibly a genuine ally. He glanced at the messenger, who shrugged, ignorant of the note's origin. Ned's first instinct was caution, but something in him, some flicker of the old Ned Stark who believed in the quiet holiness of Godswoods, told him he should see what lay behind the message. He took the note, gave a curt nod to the messenger, and watched him vanish into the corridor. So many secrets loomed in King's Landing, so many hidden hands at work. Ned read the note again by candlelight, his brow furrowing. If it was a trap, he would come armed, or with a guard posted nearby. But if it was a chance at the truth, he would not dismiss it. He had so many questions swirling, so many uncertain roads. The letter offered one potential path, though it might lead to further danger. He considered waiting until the next night, or the one after that, to better gauge the watchers who roamed the Red Keep. Finally, he tucked the note into his pocket and doused the candle, letting the darkness wrap around him. As he lay on his bed, he tried to sleep, but his mind kept drifting. He could almost hear Robert's booming voice in his memory. "Gods, Ned, I never wanted to be king." And yet, Robert had taken that crown and left Ned the burden of sorting out the aftermath. Ned breathed in, slow and steady, bracing himself for the days to come. Dawn would bring fresh challenges, and if he dared to seek out this unknown friend in the Godswood, He might find answers or a blade in the dark. He closed his eyes, heart beating a steady drum of tension. Honor had guided him this far. He prayed it would not betray him in the final hour. Ka. Ned dreamed of home, though his slumber was fitful at best. The hush of the godswood in Winterfell came to him in fragments. The rustle of leaves, a trickling stream, and the proud gray walls that had sheltered Stark blood for generations. But when he woke, it was to the cramped darkness of the Hand's chambers in the Red Keep, and the reality that the realm rested on his shoulders like a great stone slab. He sat up slowly, feeling the stiffness in his back. In the hearth, embers still glowed with faint orange light, casting dancing shapes on the walls. Dawn was near, but not yet come. He doubted he would sleep again. He dressed without summoning a servant, choosing clothes of somber brown and gray that reminded him of the north. His mind drifted to the letter he had received the previous night. A cryptic summons to the godswood here in King's Landing. A friend, it said, though experience had taught him to treat any such claim with caution. Still, something about the words, the urgency in their stroke, compelled him to heed them. If it was a trap laid by the Lannisters, they likely would not hide it behind so subtle a pretense. He had survived so far by trusting his instincts, and this time was no different. Quietly, he slipped from his chambers. The corridors at this hour were nearly deserted, but for the occasional torchbearer, or patrolling gold cloak. A few recognized him, stepping aside to bow. He offered them curt nods, then continued on. In the distance, he heard a servant yawning, the scuff of a boot on stone. Otherwise, the Red Keep lay still, as though the fortress itself was caught in uneasy dreams. Soon, the city would awaken. Bakers would stoke their ovens, dockworkers would unload ships, and the swirl of intrigue would begin anew. But for these precious minutes, King's Landing belonged only to the shadows and the uncertain. He left by a discreet side door that opened onto a covered walkway. The castle's garden sprawled beneath a half-hearted moon, shaped by elegant hedges and paved paths. Beyond them rose the Sept Tower, pale in the waning starlight. Ned walked carefully, mind straying to the children still sleeping in their respective chambers. Sansa, no doubt curled in her silken blankets, dreaming of becoming a beloved queen to a prince who was no true prince. Arya, meanwhile, might be sprawled on her bed, drooling onto her pillow, her practiced sword within arm's reach. For a moment, warmth touched Ned's heart at the thought of them. He silently prayed this city would not break their spirits before he could bring them safely home. He reached the broad doors leading to the godswood. A pair of guards glanced at him, then aside, as if uncertain whether to stop the hand of the king himself. Ned paused only long enough to confirm they bore no familiar sigil. These were just castle guards, men of average build and uncertain loyalty, likely placed there by some functionary of the keep. They made no move to speak, so he passed between them. Beyond the gate lay a small stretch of trees and a pool reflecting the sky. King's Landing's godswood was nothing like the ancient one at Winterfell. It lacked a heart tree carved with a face, lacking that sense of timeless power that held the hush of centuries in its leaves. Still, it was the only patch of green sanctuary in a city of stone, and Ned often found his way here when the burdens of the court weighed too heavy. Moonlight spilled through slender branches, leaving shifting patterns on the ground. Ned's boots crushed a scattering of fallen leaves. He inhaled deeply, catching the faint scent of damp soil. He was not alone. He could sense another presence. He paused, every nerve alert. The thick trunk of an oak partially obscured a robed figure, who stepped forward slowly as Ned approached. A hood concealed the stranger's face at first, but then a brief tilt of the head revealed the features of Lord Varys, the Master of Whisperers. He dipped his head in a small bow. "My Lord Protector," he murmured. "You came." Ned frowned, though perhaps he should not have been surprised. "You sent the note?" Varys pressed his hands together in a gesture almost prayerful. "Indeed, I did. Forgive the secrecy. But there are eyes and ears everywhere in the Red Keep. I wish to speak without the usual shadows that lurk behind me." Ned suppressed a weary sigh. Varys always spoke in riddles. Still, he had been valuable more than once. "Speak then," Ned said. "If you have something worth my time." Say it plainly. Varys glanced around as if confirming they were alone. Then his voice dipped lower. There's a storm brewing, my lord. The Lannisters are not idle. Messages from Casterly Rock arrive weekly, and there are plans afoot. Queen Cersei grows ever bolder, and there are those who advise her that your presence here's a thorn best removed. The words did not shock Ned. He had expected as much. I'm no fool, Varys. I know she wants me gone. She tolerates me only because Joffrey is still a boy, not yet strong enough in the eyes of the realm to stand alone. Bemere. Varys nodded, stepping closer so that his soft slippers made hardly a sound on the grass. True, but there is more. Lord Tywin has been assembling men in the Westerlands. Fresh recruits, heavily armed. His forges burn night and day. Rumor says he's waiting for the slightest excuse to bring his forces to King's Landing and restore order. If that happens, you can guess who will hold the real power. Ned folded his arms. So you're warning me of open war? Varys hesitated, drawing in a breath. I suspect Lord Tywin will not move openly unless provoked. But Cersei, she could provoke it if she chooses. A single confrontation might be enough to justify the arrival of a Lannister host at our gates. He paused, letting the hush of the trees fill the space between them. If you intend to protect the realm, you must consider steps that go beyond small council sessions and incremental changes in the city watch. You must secure allies. Ned felt a familiar tightness in his chest. He had spent days writing letters to allies, but as of yet, no certain help had come. Stannis remained silent on Dragonstone. Renly lurked in the castle, balancing a courtly smile with private ambitions. The Riverlands would be torn if war broke, forced to choose between Tully loyalties and the crown. And the North, for all its might, remained far away. I'm aware, but I won't plunge the realm into bloodshed without cause. Varys lowered his head in an almost obsequious bow. Of course not, my lord. I only wished you to know that your enemies gather strength each day. If you wait too long, you may find the walls closing in, and no path to peace except surrender. Nanidant. Or death, Ned added grimly. The faint rustle of leaves passed between them. Thank you for your warning. Is that all? A hesitation lingered in Varys' posture. There is one more matter. A smaller one, perhaps, but it may yet have large consequences. Word from beyond the sea. The Targaryen girl is rumored to be with child. Khal Drogo's child. If that rumor is true, the Dothraki may have new reason to cross the narrow sea when the babe is grown, or if some impetus spurs them. The late King Robert was adamant she be removed, but with his passing, the matter has lost urgency, or so many believe. I warn you not to discount the threat of a Targaryen alliance with the Dothraki. Mendersoin. Ned's brow furrowed. I won't launch an assassination across the sea. Robert and I parted ways on that notion before his death. I have no wish to kill a girl, especially not for the sake of a hypothetical war. Varys' expression was inscrutable, his voice smooth. Then you must be prepared should she return with an army. The Targaryen line is not as forgotten as some might hope. Remember, my lord, that a single spark can set this realm aflame from more corners than one. Nan was Danesorn. Ned drew a slow breath, sensing the weight of all these potential threats. I will remember. Now leave me, Master Varys. If you're seen with me here, we lose the very secrecy you sought. Varys bowed again, whispering a final caution. Keep your sword close, Lord Stark. The game grows deadlier each day. Then he slipped away, silent as a wraith, leaving Ned alone in the moon-dappled glade. Ned remained in the Godswood a while longer, letting the hush seep into him. He found a small bench near the pool, stared at the reflection of the sky. Above, the moon had begun to wane, seeding the horizon to a faint hint of dawn. He closed his eyes for a moment, trying to steady his heart. Targaryens, Lannisters, an uncertain realm. The illusions of peace were thinning. He rose and returned to the keep, stepping lightly past the watchman, who stared but said nothing. By the time the sun rose fully, Ned was at his desk in the Hand Solar, reading over ledgers. Servants had brought bread, honey, and a steaming cup of spiced wine. He managed a few bites. His hand trembled slightly as he lifted the cup. He frowned, annoyed with himself. He was not an old man, yet the strain of regency weighed upon his bones. He was in the midst of drafting an order to have more city watch assigned to the tournament grounds, when a knock sounded on the door. Tamard, one of his loyal guardsmen, poked his head inside. "My lord, Sir Barristan Selmy wishes to speak with you." "Show him in," Ned said. Sir Barristan entered in his white cloak, the lines of age etched gently on his face. He bowed with the courtesy of a knight who had served kings long before Robert's day. "My Lord Protector," he began, respectful but direct. "The king is in the training yard and has asked for you. He wants to see a demonstration of arms." Ned set aside his quill. It was typical of Joffrey to summon him with little notice. "A demonstration? At this hour?" Barristan nodded. "Yes, my lord. He's in a mood to watch swordplay. The Hound is there as well as other knights. The king expressed impatience when you weren't present." Ned sighed, wiping ink from his fingers. "Then we'd best not keep him waiting." He rose, gestured for Barristan to lead. They walked side by side through the corridors. The older knight's face was solemn. Ned recalled that Barristan had survived the downfall of the Targaryens, had served King Aerys, then Robert, and now Joffrey. Through each regime he had maintained an unblemished honor. If there was any man in the Kingsguard Ned trusted, it was Selmy. "Sir Barristan," he said quietly as they walked, "if the time ever comes when loyalty to the boy king conflicts with loyalty to the realm, what will you do?" Barristan's eyes flicked to Ned, surprise evident. Then he replied in a measured tone, "My vows command me to protect the king, whoever sits upon the throne. Yet I pray that my king and the realm's interests will not come in conflict. If they do, I hope the Seven grant me wisdom to find the honorable path." Ned nodded, though he knew the path might not be so simple. Sometimes, in the labyrinth of power, there were no purely honorable choices, only those that seemed least dishonorable. "I pray the same," he said. They arrived at the training yard, where sunlight streamed across packed dirt. Joffrey stood at the edge of the yard in fine attire, a black doublet trimmed in gold, the Baratheon stag emblazoned on his chest. The Hound loomed behind him, half his face hidden by that fearsome burn scar. A handful of knights were present, some sparring lightly, while a curious circle of onlookers, lesser lords, stable hands, even a few passing courtiers, observed. Ned strode forward, inclining his head to the boy king. Joffrey acknowledged him with a flicker of that haughty gaze. "You're late, Lord Stark," Joffrey said, impatience curling his voice. "I've had to watch these pathetic attempts at swordplay without your esteemed presence. Now that you're here, perhaps we can see something more entertaining." Ned bit back a sharp retort. He bowed. "Forgive me, your grace. How might I serve?" Joffrey smirked, glancing at the men in the yard. "A contest. I want to see the hand of the king's men prove themselves against my Kingsguard. We can't have the court's champion daydreaming when war might beckon, can we?" "Zem." A murmur rose among the onlookers. The idea of a sparring contest intrigued them. But it was also a subtle slight. By framing it as his men versus the Kingsguard, Joffrey tested Ned's authority. Ned exchanged a brief look with Barristan. The old knight seemed to sense the tension, but said nothing. Nearby, the Hound stood stone-faced, arms crossed. Ned forced a polite smile. "Of course, your grace. Though I hope this is for practice alone. We cannot afford injuries before the coming tournament." "Then none." Joffrey waved a hand. "Fine. Blunted weapons, if you insist. But let's see who has the skill to impress me. Sir Meryn?" He called out, a lanky Kingsguard knight, with a perpetually sour expression. "You'll fight one of Lord Stark's men. Who will it be?" Ned surveyed the yard. Jory Castle was gone, dead in that confrontation months past. Tamard, a sturdy man with a dependable sword arm, was at his side. He nodded toward him. "Tamard, represent me well." Tamard bowed to Ned, then to Joffrey. Sir Meryn selected a blunted longsword from the rack. Tamard did the same. The onlookers formed a ring in the dirt. Joffrey and the Hound moved closer, curiosity gleaming in the boy's pale eyes. Ned felt no great love for such displays, but refusing would only bruise the king's pride. Better to let it play out swiftly. The two men squared off. Meryn struck first, a downward slash that Tomard caught on his blade. Steel clacked. Tomard twisted aside, trying for a quick riposte. Meryn blocked, pressing in. They circled one another, exchanging quick blows. Despite the blunt edges, each strike rang with force. Dust kicked up around their boots. A few watchers cheered. Joffrey looked on with a slight sneer, occasionally shouting, "Hit him harder, Sir Meryn!" After a minute of back and forth, Tomard saw an opening and slammed his shoulder into Meryn's chest. The king's guard staggered, and Tomard brought his blade around, pressing it to Meryn's side. The blow would have been telling in a real fight. Cheers erupted. Joffrey's face fell. "No," the king snapped. "That was clumsy, Sir Meryn. Do it again. I want a proper display." "You and then worse." Meryn looked uncertainly at the boy king, then across at Tomard. Ned frowned. This was not how a fair contest was usually judged, but Joffrey clearly wanted a different outcome. Tomard glanced at Ned for direction. Ned cleared his throat. "They fought well, Your Grace. The match seems decided." But Joffrey huffed. "It was too short. I command you to fight once more, this time until I say stop." His eyes flicked over the yard, then settled on an even larger sword in the rack. "Use live steel." Ned's breath drew sharply. "Your Grace, if either man is injured, if they're knights, they should be able to handle themselves." Joffrey interrupted, petulant. "Or maybe the hands man isn't up to the task." A hush fell. The watchers shifted uneasily. Ned weighed his response carefully. Appearing weak before the king was dangerous, but letting them fight with sharpened blades posed real risk. The tension grew until a new voice cut through the silence. "Your Grace," Sir Barristan said calmly, "if you desire a demonstration of skill, might I suggest we pick volunteers who are accustomed to training with live steel? Sir Meryn is indeed skilled, but let him rest. I will face one of Lord Stark's men myself if it pleases you. I vow no one shall be gravely injured." His words were gentle, but carried a note of finality that only a true legend could wield. Joffrey considered him with a frown. Then he shrugged. "Very well. Let's see how the Lord Commander of my Kingsguard fares. Let him fight." "Who?" His glance darted about, resting at last on a tall northern guardsman in Ned's retinue named Alan. "You there." Alan hesitated, then bowed. Sir Barristan offered him a small, courteous nod. "We shall use tourney swords," Barristan proposed, retrieving a fine-edged but dulled blade. Alan did the same. Joffrey's lips tightened, but he didn't object. With the ring formed anew, Barristan and Alan exchanged the warrior's salute. Then, steel met steel. Ned watched intently. Sir Barristan had spent a lifetime perfecting his art. His movements were controlled, almost serene. Alan attacked with the fervor of a younger man, and for a few moments, Barristan allowed him to press forward, as though testing the measure of the guard's skill. Then the old knight shifted stance, guiding each parry with uncanny precision. He stepped inside Alan's guard, tapped aside the younger man's sword, and lightly rapped his shoulder. It was a touch that said, "You are undone, had I chosen to cut deeper." Alan staggered back, breathing hard, while Barristan lowered his blade in a gesture of respect. The small crowd burst into applause. Joffrey seemed appeased, offering a faint smirk. "Very well. That's enough for now," he declared. "My boredom is cured." He spun and walked away, the hound trailing behind. A handful of lords followed, offering the king flattery. Ned exhaled, tension draining. He gave Tomard a nod, grateful the situation had not escalated. Barristan approached, breathing only lightly from the exertion. "I trust that was acceptable, my Lord Protector?" "Acceptable and appreciated," Ned said quietly. "You kept a good man from risking needless harm." Barristan dipped his head. "We serve the same realm." "I pray it remains so." Word of this morning's event spread through the castle by midday. Some praised Barristan's chivalry. Others snickered at Joffrey's attempts to see blood spilled. Ned knew the boy's cruelty simmered. He dreaded the day it would spill over. Yet there was little he could do while bound by the Regency agreement. All the more reason he had to be vigilant. He returned to his solar to find a small stack of letters requiring his attention. One bore the seal of House Tyrell. He read it carefully, discerning a polite but guarded message. Mace Tyrell expressed condolences for the loss of King Robert and inquired after the upcoming tournament. Should the new king desire our presence, the Reach would be honored to send its champions, it read. Ned considered how the Tyrells, flush with resources and men, might tip the balance if war threatened. But could they be trusted? House Tyrell had no great love for the Lannisters, but they also yearned for favor in the capital. Possibly they were biding their time, waiting to back whichever side looked strongest. He next read a missive from the Vale, from Lysa Arryn. Her words repeated vague warnings about the Lannisters' hand in Jon Arryn's death, urging Ned to keep a watchful eye. But she refused to come to King's Landing, citing the safety of her son. She would not risk him. She wrote, "In that nest of vipers." Ned set the letter aside, frustration mounting. If Lysa had proof, she would not share it. She remained perched high in the eyrie, safe behind her impenetrable fortress, while the rest of the realm quivered beneath the threat of war. So be it. A rap at his door announced Petyr Baelish, who slipped inside with an insouciant grin. "My Lord Stark," he said, sweeping an exaggerated bow. "I hear there was great sport in the yard this morning. You must let me know next time. I do love a good show of swords clashing." "Nebro." Ned studied Littlefinger's sly smile. "You seem in fine spirits, Lord Baelish." "Shouldn't I be? The city is abuzz with talk of the tournament. Coin will flow like wine, and I do enjoy the sound of coin." He perched on the edge of a chair, crossing one leg over the other. "I've heard you intend to scale back the tournament's prizes due to the crown's debts. A pity. A smaller purse might dampen the enthusiasm of certain flamboyant participants." Ned leaned back in his seat. "It's necessary. We can't keep bleeding the treasury. And if knights won't compete for honor, they can stay home." "Then?" Littlefinger chuckled. "How very Stark of you. But do remember, the more excitement we generate, the more coin might come in from wagers and sponsors. A cleverly managed tournament can yield profit, if one knows how to skim from every pot." Ned's face hardened. "I've no interest in skimming. The realm's finances are not a gambler's toy." Baelish spread his hands in mock surrender. "Of course. I merely offer my expertise in such matters. The crowds love spectacle, and if we fail to provide it, rumors will swirl that the new king is either impoverished or lacking in confidence. Perception can become reality swiftly in this city." "And now?" Ned understood the logic but disliked feeding the city's taste for lavish displays. "I'll consider what you've said. Is that all you came for?" Petyr's grin softened. "I came to inquire after your well-being. There are whispers you might be in precarious standing with certain influential folk. Should you ever need a friend, you have but to call on me." Ned regarded him with cool eyes. "If I recall, you already offered me your friendship. Yet it came with a price. I prefer to keep my dealings straightforward." Baelish's smile became almost affectionate, as if humored by a child. "Lord Stark, you still think the game can be played cleanly. In King's Landing, the only straightforward dealing is the sword in your heart. But I admire your resolve." "Truly." He stood, adjusting his fine doublet. "Remember, a small man can cast a large shadow when the sun is setting. That is all I'll say." With a mocking bow, he left Ned to his thoughts. The rest of the day unfolded in a blur of petitions, discussions with the City Watch, and meetings with Pycelle on whether the crown could broker better terms with the Iron Bank of Bravos. By late afternoon, Ned was drained. He took a moment in the tower's upper balcony, letting the city's noise wash over him from below. Against the horizon, the dragon pit's crumbling dome stood like a skeletal reminder of past glories. Farther off, the docks teemed with ships, sails snapping in the breeze. If trouble truly came, that harbor could become a gateway for invasion or a blockade if House Lannister took control of the seas. He tried not to think of such possibilities, yet found it impossible to banish them entirely. As evening fell, He made his way to the private suite where Sansa and Arya took supper. He found the girls seated on cushions by a low table, picking at plates of fruit and cheese. Sansa's face brightened at his arrival. Arya grinned, showing a smear of grape juice on her chin. "Father, you missed it," she said excitedly. "Syrio made me do drills all morning. He says I'm learning quickly." And Ned managed a small smile. "I'm proud of you, but be cautious, Arya. Blades are not a game," she huffed, clearly unimpressed by the warning. "Not a game to me either. I want to be able to protect myself if—" She stopped, casting a glance at Sansa, who pursed her lips in mild disapproval. Sansa intervened, smoothing her skirt. "Father, have you heard any news of the tournament? Joffrey told me it will be splendid with singers and pavilions like nothing I've ever seen." Ned could hear the excitement in her voice, laced with that unshakable romanticism. "There will be a tournament, yes. It might not be as grand as some imagine, but it will still be something to behold." Sansa's eyes shone. "Joffrey says he wants me by his side when he bestows the victor's laurel. He wants to show the whole city that House Stark and House Baratheon are united." Ned nodded, trying not to let his misgivings show. The notion of Sansa so prominently displayed beside Joffrey unsettled him, yet refusing could spark rumors that the North denied the king's betrothed. "You shall have that honor then," he said softly. "Just remember, Sansa, that the tourney field can be dangerous. Knights ride with lances that sometimes stray. Watch from a safe vantage." Arya scowled. "I wish I could see the fights up close. Sir Loras Tyrell is coming, they say. They call him the Knight of Flowers, but I hear he's fiercer than he looks." Ned ruffled Arya's hair affectionately. "I'll see if I can get you a decent seat, you little hawk." His daughter's presence eased the knot in his chest for a time. He stayed with them until the candles burned low, listening to their chatter. Arya gloated about her sword lessons. Sansa tried to appear disinterested but was clearly impressed by talk of skilled warriors. After they began yawning, Ned kissed them goodnight and left. Exiting into the corridor, he found the ever-watchful Cersei stepping from a nearby stairwell, flanked by 2 Lannister guards. Her black mourning gown swept the floor, though a golden lion pin glittered at her shoulder. She greeted Ned with a slight inclination of her head. "Lord Protector, a lovely evening for family time, is it not?" Ned stiffened. "Indeed, Your Grace. Have you spent time with the king tonight?" "Northern." She smoothed a hand over her dress. "Briefly. He was in a mood, complaining that the men in the yard lacked skill. I suggested he retire early, lest he wear himself out before the tournament. The responsibilities of the throne can be taxing on a young mind." Ned watched her carefully. "I trust you keep him well advised." Her lips curved in a polite, distant smile. "As best I can, but he needs a firm hand. I wouldn't want him to grow soft. The realm requires a strong king." The threat in her tone was faint, but Ned heard it. She implied that if he contradicted Joffrey too often, the boy might see him as an obstacle to be removed. Ned bowed slightly. "I share your concern for the king's well-being." "I'm glad to hear it," she replied. "I would hate to see disagreements strain the unity of this court. We must be of one mind, mustn't we?" Ned gave her a measured look. "The crown depends on it." Cersei's eyes lingered on him for a moment, glittering with something unreadable. Then she turned, her guards forming up beside her. "Good night, Lord Stark," she said over her shoulder, voice echoing as she descended the hallway. Ned stood there, the tension from earlier creeping back into his shoulders. Back in his solar, he lit a candle and settled at his desk once more. Each day's accumulation of rumors, warnings, and subtle threats weighed upon him. If the Lannisters truly intended to push him aside, they might soon test his resolve. He had to be ready. He found himself drafting letters again, one to Lord Manderley in White Harbor, reminding him of the oath his house swore to the Starks, another to Galbard Glover, who had once served Ned's father. If hostilities erupted, Ned would need men he could trust without reservation. And though he prayed it would not come to that, he knew better than to leave himself defenseless. He sealed the letters and summoned a discreet courier, giving explicit instructions that the ravens be sent north. Then, by the wavering candle, he pulled out the royal parchment, the one that named him Lord Protector and Regent. The seal from Robert's ring was still intact. He read the words once more. I, Robert of the House Baratheon, the first of his name, King of the Andals and the first men, etc., do hereby proclaim Eddard of House Stark shall rule as Lord Protector of the realm until my heir comes of age. The crucial phrase lingered in Ned's mind, my heir. Robert had meant for Ned to protect the rightful succession. Yet the truth that Joffrey was not Robert's son hung over everything. If he revealed it, war might be inevitable. If he kept it hidden, he risked his own honor and the kingdom's stability. A monstrous choice, either way. He sighed, rubbed the bridge of his nose, and placed the document aside. Exhaustion tugged at him. He extinguished the candle and let darkness claim the room, feeling its cool embrace. This city, with its twisting corridors and hidden corners, had become a labyrinth in which he wandered, seeking the faint promise of clarity. Outside, the wind from Blackwater Bay brushed against the castle walls, a lonely sound. The next week passed in a tense flurry. Caravans of knights and squires poured into King's Landing, setting up pavilions near the city. Vendors sold trinkets, banners, and every manner of food. The small folk buzzed with excitement for the spectacle, leaving the streets crowded at all hours. Ned oversaw arrangements for security, doubling the guards. He wanted to ensure no wave of pickpockets or sellswords would disrupt the tenuous calm. He also took special care to see the king's seating and the royal box properly fortified. Cersei's eyes flicked over the measures with approval, but also with a certain smugness. She reveled in the pageantry, eager to show off her son, the new king, to thousands of onlookers. Ned suspected she hoped that the display would cement Joffrey's legitimacy in the hearts of the people. A lavish spectacle often overshadowed whispers of bastardy or questionable claims. Meanwhile, the small council convened almost daily, discussing the finances. Littlefinger pressed for ways to squeeze more coin out of the city, imposing extra tariffs on merchants who planned to profit from the tournament. Ned agreed with reluctance, for the treasury was indeed empty, and they could not simply conjure gold from the air. Pycelle droned on about ancient precedents, while Varys offered cryptic commentary about unseen dangers. Renly Baratheon made appearances in vibrant garb, flashing his charismatic smile, sometimes hinting that a younger, more approachable king might suit the realm better, but never openly naming himself. Ned took it all in with silent caution, as though playing a game of cives on a board where any piece might betray him. The day of the opening ceremony dawned bright. Trumpets sounded across the city, summoning crowds to the tourney grounds. Ned, in his formal attire of gray and white, rode in a procession beside Joffrey's litter. Sansa followed in a separate carriage, her face alight with anticipation. Arya was with her, though she wore a sullen expression at being forced into a dress. The masses pressed in along the streets, cheering, or simply craning their necks for a glimpse of the new king. Crimson and gold banners fluttered for House Lannister. The Black Stag of Baratheon flew as well, though not so numerous. Ned saw only a few gray direwolf standards of House Stark here and there. It reminded him starkly of how far he was from home. At the tourney grounds, the stands rose high in wooden tiers. Noble lords and ladies filled the best seats, shading themselves with colorful parasols. Merchants hawked roasted meats, spiced wine, and lemon cakes from stalls along the perimeter. The smell of horse manure, sweat, and anticipation mingled in the air. Joffrey took his place in the royal box with Cersei at his side. Ned joined them, though he kept a slight distance. Below, knights in gleaming armor trotted onto the field for the presentation of arms, each sporting plumes and heraldry. As horns blared, the crowd roared. It was a spectacle indeed. Sansa, near the front of the box, leaned forward with shining eyes, absorbing every detail. Arya fidgeted, wishing she could wander down to get a closer look at the horses and lances. Joffrey raised a hand, silencing the crowd. He gave a brief declaration, dedicating the tournament to the memory of King Robert and proclaiming his own reign a new era of strength and glory. Applause followed, though Ned detected a note of forced enthusiasm from some corners. Then the jousting began. Sir Balon Swan rode against a knight from the Westerlands first, lances shattering in a thunder of hoofs. Round after round, cheers rose and fell. Knights fell to the dirt, some unhorsed with painful crashes, but no serious injuries at first. Amid the swirl of color, Ned felt the tension that lurked behind the pageantry. Cersei's occasional glance at him seemed to say, "See, we can dazzle the realm while you brood." Yet Ned remained stoic. He knew how quickly splendor could turn to bloodshed. By mid-afternoon, the Knight of Flowers, Sir Loras Tyrell, made his appearance in a shimmering suit of silvered armor. A cascade of flowers woven into his horse's barding. The crowd surged with excitement at his beauty and grace. He unhorsed his first opponent easily, then pranced around the field, waving to the ladies. Sansa clapped her hands in delight. Arya rolled her eyes but watched keenly. Next, Sir Loras faced the formidable Sandor Clegane. The hound's dark armor and scarred visage cast a menacing aura. Yet to the crowd's astonishment, Loras outmaneuvered him. A deft blow that caught the hound off balance. Clegane crashed to the ground in a spray of dust. Gasps rippled through the stands. Sandor rose slowly, tension in every line of his body. For a moment, Ned feared the hound would attack Loras in anger. But Joffrey shouted from the royal box for him to stand down. Sandor bowed stiffly to Loras, who in turn saluted with a flourish. The crowd roared its approval. Ned glanced at Joffrey. The boy was clapping, but the set of his jaw betrayed annoyance that his sworn shield had been bested. Cersei feigned a bright smile, though her eyes darted to Ned, flickering with an unspoken message. Perhaps the Lannisters disliked seeing a rival house claim so much admiration. Margaery Tyrell was in attendance as well, sitting with her family, calmly observing. Ned wondered if alliances were forming behind the scenes. The Tyrells had wealth and men enough to be decisive in any conflict. Between rounds, servants brought refreshments to the royal box. Cool water, wine, and platters of fresh fruit. Joffrey slurped wine greedily, ignoring the courtesies. Sansa offered him a timid smile, which he barely acknowledged. Instead, he drummed his fingers on the rail, watching the knights below as though they were nothing more than pieces in his game. Occasionally he asked Ned a question about who might win the next tilt. Ned answered politely, though inwardly he felt uneasy at the boy's increasingly cold manner. The tension rose further when a new challenger rode onto the field, bearing a sigil unknown to many. A gauntlet gripping lightning. Murmurs spread. This was a hedge knight from the Stormlands, some said, eager to make a name. He carried himself with confidence. In a surprise upset, he managed to unhorse an older knight from the Vale, sending shockwaves of excitement through the crowd. Joffrey laughed at the old knight's tumble, calling it pathetic. Ned's frown deepened. Compassion seemed foreign to the boy. Round after round, the day wore on. Lancel Lannister, a cousin to the Queen, made a feeble showing and was knocked out swiftly. Ser Meryn performed decently, but failed to advance. At last, as the sun sank lower and the day's matches ended, the heralds announced that the final rounds would take place on the morrow. The crowd began dispersing, still chattering with excitement. Joffrey stood, stretching. He declared himself tired of the day's amusements and stalked off with Cersei in tow. Sansa yearned to stay a while longer, but Ned insisted they return to the Red Keep before nightfall. They rode back through throngs of small folk, who were rowdier now after hours of drink and spectacle. The gold cloaks kept the crowds at bay. In their carriage, Sansa chattered about the Knight of Flowers, how gallant he was. Arya leaned out the window, eyes searching the faces in the street. "They don't all look happy," she observed. Indeed. Ned noticed pockets of onlookers wearing grim expressions, likely resentful that the city's resources were spent on a tournament while their own bellies went half-filled. A spark, he thought, that could ignite a riot if misfortune befell the capital. Back in the castle, Ned escorted the girls to their chambers, then proceeded to check in with the city watch captains to ensure no chaos erupted overnight. The men looked weary but determined, mindful of potential brawls among the visiting knights' retinues. Ned commended them and returned to his solar as dusk claimed the sky. He found a stack of fresh messages. One from the north, good news that all was quiet there. Another from a minor lord in the Reach, pledging to attend tomorrow's final jousts. A third from an informant in the Riverlands, warning that Gregor Clegane had been seen leading raids against peasants. suspected of withholding taxes. The list of troubles never ended. He set the letters aside, eyes drawn to the window where moonlight spilled in. Faint noise drifted from the yard below, the hush of stable boys, the clank of armor. Even now, the Red Keep remained alive. Tomorrow's jousts would be more intense, culminating in a final champion. It was meant to entertain and unify the realm, but Ned felt only apprehension. He sensed that behind the swirling banners and cheering throngs, the powers in King's Landing were shifting like tectonic plates about to collide. His thoughts went to Robert, his old friend, now ashes in the wind. Robert had once told him, laughing over a flagon of ale, that the realm was a beast best kept tamed by feasts and tournaments. "Give them enough reason to cheer, Ned, and they'll forget their troubles," he'd said. Yet Ned feared the realm's troubles ran too deep for feasting to cure. Still, he had pledged himself to keep the peace for as long as he could. For the sake of his daughters, for the memory of those he had already lost, and for the uncertain future that lay ahead. He stood by the window until the moon rose higher, silver and silent, a distant witness to the mortal drama unfolding below. Somewhere in the city, men plotted, lords whispered of alliances, and the threat of war loomed just out of sight. He thought of the letter from Varys' unknown friend. Whoever might have second thoughts about the current regime, or might help Ned see the truth. For now, no new summons came. Perhaps that was for the best. Too many truths at once could tear the kingdom apart faster than any army. Steeling himself, Ned turned from the window. The hour was late, and tomorrow would demand all his wits. He walked slowly to his bedchamber, each step echoing in the quiet corridor. In his mind's eye, he pictured Winterfell again, the ancient godswood under a sky swirling with snow. If he closed his eyes, he could almost feel the chill air on his face, hear the quiet drip of meltwater on the stones. But when he opened them, he saw only the walls of the Red Keep, and he knew he would not sleep easily. Honor weighed upon him, a crown of thorns he had never asked to bear. Yet bear it he must. And so, with tired resolve, he closed the chamber door behind him, set his sword within easy reach, and prepared for another restless night, his dreams crowded with the faces of those he could not fail. Ned woke with a start to find the chamber still cloaked in pre-dawn gloom. The embers in the hearth were long cold. At first he thought some noise had disturbed him, perhaps the echo of a distant voice or the soft scratch of mice behind the stone walls. But now the silence pressed in on all sides. He rolled onto his back and lay there in the darkness for a time, his mind stirring with half-formed memories of troubled dreams. Again he had dreamt of Winterfell, the courtyard bright with fresh snow, the hush so deep he could almost feel it in his bones. Then, in the dream's uncertain swirl, came the image of Robert's face, pale in death. His lips parted, as if to speak. Ned shut his eyes to chase that image away. He had no time for ghosts now. He sat up, rubbed the weariness from his face, and rose to kindle a fresh light. Outside, a thin line of gray just touched the horizon. The final day of the tournament would begin soon enough. A swirl of emotion stirred in his chest. Apprehension that Joffrey's thirst for spectacle might grow more extreme. Concern that the Lannisters might use the gathering crowds to their advantage. He reminded himself that he was no coward. He had faced steel on battlefields. Yet intrigue was a subtler blade, one he had never favored but was now forced to parry. He dressed quickly, choosing a doublet of dark gray and fastening his cloak with a small silver clasp in the shape of a direwolf's head. He paused to regard himself in the polished metal mirror. He looked tired, older than his years, but there was a resolve in his eyes that he hoped would not fail him. At that moment, a soft knock sounded at the door. When he opened it, Tomard stood outside, leaning on his spear. "My lord," said Tomard, "forgive the early hour. We've had a bit of a scuffle near the barracks. 2 night squires came to blows over a stolen saddle, of all things. It's settled now, but one boy took a nasty knock to the head." "Bane?" Ned sighed. "No serious harm done, I hope?" "None that a day's rest won't cure," Tomard said. "We have them separated. I expect no further trouble from that corner." "Good. Keep them apart until the tournament is done." We can't have petty quarrels lighting the bigger fire. Ned closed the door behind him and gestured for Tamar to follow. Have you heard any word from the city watch about the crowds? The city is brimming, my lord, Tamar replied as they walked the corridor. But the watch is out in force. We're doing our best. The Gold Cloaks have increased their patrols, only a few minor brawls in the taverns. With luck, that's all we'll see. Ned nodded. Let's hope the seven are kind today. He parted ways with Tamar near the main stairwell, intending to check on Sansa and Arya. The corridors of the Red Keep were already stirring with quiet activity. Maids hurried by, carrying linens and fresh rushes. Servants in the royal livery bustled toward the kitchens, presumably to prepare the day's meals for the grandstands at the tourney field. Now and then, Ned passed a lesser lord or sworn sword, each bowing or offering a muttered greeting. At the suite where his daughters resided, he found that Arya was already up, chewing on a chunk of bread while tugging at the bodice of a plain dress. She glanced over with a wry grimace. Do I have to wear this? It's so tight. How am I supposed to move if something happens? That would time up, he said. Sansa, seated in front of a small mirror as a lady's maid plaited her hair, gave Arya an exasperated look. Nothing's going to happen. You're just fussing because you want to run off and play with a wooden sword. Arya's eyes flared. It's not playing, I'm training. Ned offered a gentle clearing of his throat before Sansa could say something sharper. Arya, at least for the morning, indulge your sister's sense of propriety. After the tourney is done, you can wear whatever you like. Agreed? Then Sam. Arya huffed, but she didn't resist further, only pulled fiercely at her sleeves. Sansa beamed at Ned in a manner that made her look almost grown up. Her hair pulled into a neat half braid that left a few curls framing her face. Father, will the king truly allow me to crown the victor with a laurel? He said so last night? That was the plan from what I understand, Ned replied, summoning a small smile. Assuming the final champion is fine with it. This day will likely draw more people than the last. Are you ready for it, Sansa? She lowered her eyes with a blush. I hope so. I've never been in front of so many lords and ladies. So. Arya rolled her eyes again. It's just a bunch of show. Why can't we do something that matters, like... Arya, Ned cut in gently, not today. I need you both to listen to the steward who's assigned to bring you to the royal box. And remember, with such a crowd, you must stay close to each other. There could be pickpockets or worse. Do not wander without at least a guardsman along. Arya gave him a reluctant nod, while Sansa promised in her prim voice that she would not let Arya out of her sight. Ned was fairly certain that was a promise neither would keep for very long, but at least he'd given the caution. Soon after, they set out from the Red Keep in a small procession. The day had dawned bright, the sky an almost painfully clear blue. Trumpets sounded from the direction of the tourney grounds. The roads leading there were thronged with vendors, knights on horseback, retainers, and the curious small folk who had come from outlying villages to glimpse the spectacle. Banners fluttered on every corner, from the roaring Lion of Lannister to the Golden Rose of Tyrell, with a smattering of smaller sigils from the Vale, the Stormlands, and Dorne. Ned saw the black banner of House Baratheon by the main gate, Joffrey's standard, in theory, though the boy had Lannister coloring in every feature. Ned forced the thought aside and pressed on. They arrived at the grounds to a deafening roar of cheers. The wooden stands rose high again, filled to capacity, and then some. Beneath them, merchants hawked trinkets, tin swords for children, ribbons in the colors of various houses, grilled meat spiced to smell irresistible. Ned guided Sansa and Arya toward the reserved section for the royal family and retinue. Joffrey was already seated, wearing black breeches and a crimson cloak, a golden crown perched on his blonde hair. Cersei lounged beside him in a gown of shimmering green that made her emerald eyes look all the more vivid. The king's guard stood at attention. Ned could see Sir Meryn and Sir Preston among them, with the Hound stationed a step behind Joffrey. Joffrey acknowledged Ned's arrival with a slight nod, but his expression was distant. Cersei, for her part, offered a thin smile that did not reach her eyes. "Lord Protector," she said coolly, "we are glad you could join us. Your seat is there, near mine." She indicated a sturdy wooden chair with the Stark sigil carved into the back. "I trust you enjoyed the spectacle yesterday," Ned answered in a polite tone. "It was a fine show. The knights performed admirably. We can only hope that today is equally impressive and safe." Cersei's lips curved. "Always so concerned with safety. But do not fear. We have ample guards, and no one would dare disturb the king's own tournament." "That's in." Ned inclined his head, though he did not share her easy confidence. He helped Sansa and Arya settle on a padded bench near him. Sansa watched the field with a glowing face, while Arya tapped her foot impatiently, scanning the grounds for anything that might prove more exciting than just sitting. When the heralds announced the start of the final jousts, the crowd erupted. Knights trotted forth in polished armor under colorful banners. The Knight of Flowers, Sir Loras Tyrell, received the loudest cheers, especially from the ladies in the stands. The Hound, leaning near Joffrey, gave a derisive snort but said nothing. A few more obscure knights took to the field, each hoping to best the favorites and claim a place in the final tilt. Joffrey rose from his seat to make a short speech about glory and honor, concluding with a flourish of his hand. Trumpets rang out, and the jousting began. It was a spectacle of thunderous hooves and splintering lances. Dust billowed with every charge. A few knights were unhorsed with bone-jarring impacts, though none suffered grievous wounds in the initial passes. The watchers gasped and cheered, calling out the names of their favored champions. Ned maintained a stoic facade, though he occasionally found himself startled by the force of a successful tilt. The afternoon wore on, full of color and noise. Eventually, the list narrowed to 4. Sir Loras Tyrell, of course, shining in his silvered armor. A knight from Dorne, with a sun and spear crest. Sir André Jourdain, who had ridden with surprising skill. A brawny Stormlander called Sir Eldon Estermont. And, to Ned's faint surprise, a man from the Westerlands known for his brutality. Sir Gregor Clegane, the mountain that rides. The audience seemed uneasy at the sight of Gregor, towering upon his massive warhorse. His armor was dark steel and thick plate, and his helm bore a fearsome visor. Rumor said he was Tywin Lannister's most intimidating bannerman, near unstoppable on the battlefield. Ned had heard troubling tales of Gregor's cruelty, how he'd sacked villages and left only corpses in his wake. To see the mountain here, in the heart of the city, set Ned's nerves on edge. Joffrey clapped his hands together when Gregor appeared. "I wager Sir Gregor will unseat them all," the boy king declared to no one in particular. "He rides like a storm." Cersei inclined her head. "He is formidable indeed." She cast Ned a sidelong glance. "What say you, Lord Stark?" Ned kept his expression neutral. "I'd not bet lightly against the mountain, but skill and bravery can prevail over brute force." Cersei's smile had a subtle, mocking edge. "We shall see." The semifinal tilts began. First, Sir Loras Tyrell faced off against the Dornish knight, Sir André. The sun glared off their polished armor. At the charge, wood splintered, and both riders maintained their seats. The second pass saw Loras shift his aim cleverly, striking Sir André's shield with enough angle to jar him from the saddle. The Dornishman tumbled to the dirt, rolling clear of his horse. A roar of approval came from the stands. Loras guided his mount in a graceful circle and accepted the applause with a flourish. Sansa leaned forward, dazzled, while Arya rolled her eyes at the showmanship. Then it was Gregor's turn, facing Sir Eldon Estermont. The Stormlander set his lance and charged. Gregor matched him stride for stride, an almost inhuman figure on that colossal horse. Their lances met in a deafening crack. Sir Eldon wavered, then toppled from the saddle, clattering onto the ground. Gregor barely seemed moved by the impact, sitting straight as a spear. The crowd's cheers were tinged with a hint of fear. Gregor circled back, the black steel of his armor glinting with menace. The final, then, would be Sir Loras Tyrell versus Sir Gregor Clegane. The herald declared a short pause before the deciding joust, giving the knights time to prepare fresh lances and rest their mounts. Pages scrambled onto the field, smoothing out the churned earth. Vendors in the stands hawked their wares, and Ned observed the crowd. His eyes lingered on the Lannister contingent, a group of men wearing red cloaks and bearing lion crests. They watched Gregor with quiet pride. Over by the Tyrell seating, Mace Tyrell beamed like a peacock, wearing a ridiculously large hat with a plume, flanked by his elegant daughter Margaery. She, by contrast, seemed calm and composed. Ned wondered if the Tyrells sensed an opportunity to outshine the Lannisters, or if they were simply indulging in harmless pageantry. At length, the horns sounded again. The crowd hushed as Gregor and Loras took their places at opposite ends of the tilt. Ned noticed something unusual about Loras' horse. The Knight of Flowers used a mare in heat, or so Ned had heard rumored from the stables. It was a trick sometimes employed to distract an opponent's stallion. Indeed, Gregor's massive warhorse snorted, pawing the ground, agitated by the mare's scent. Loras angled his visor, his posture tense but confident. Gregor held his lance in a vice-like grip. They spurred forward. The stands erupted with noise. Halfway down the tilt, Gregor's stallion reared, unsettled. He fought to control the beast, but the lance wavered off target. Loras, by contrast, kept a steady aim and struck Gregor's shield squarely. Though the mountain did not fall, the blow was enough to tip him dangerously. He lurched in the saddle, barely regaining control. Around Ned, the crowd roared with excitement. On the second pass, Gregor seemed more determined. Yet again his stallion jerked in response to the mare. He managed a glancing hit on Loras' shoulder but did not unhorse him. Loras's blow was more precise, driving into Gregor's side. The massive knight wobbled. The crowd gasped, certain he would topple, but he clung on. Even so, the force sent him sliding, and he struck the ground with a deafening clang of steel. A moment of stunned silence. Gregor Clegane had fallen. Loras Tyrell reined in his mare, breathless but triumphant. The stands erupted in deafening cheers. Flowers were thrown from above. Ladies called his name. Gregor's warhorse trotted nervously away, riderless. Gregor himself lay sprawled for a heartbeat, then heaved himself upright, a towering figure in battered plate. He ripped off his helm, revealing a face twisted in fury. His eyes, dark and hate-filled, fixed on Loras. In that instant, Ned saw madness flicker there. Gregor snatched his greatsword from a squire's hands, ignoring the calls for calm. With an animal roar, he charged at Loras, blade raised to strike. The crowd's cheers turned to screams. Loras had scarcely time to drop his lance and fumble for a sword. Gregor's blow crashed down, forcing Loras to parry desperately. Metal shrieked against metal. Loras reeled, forced to defend while still mounted. The mare sidestepped in panic. Another blow fell, perilously close to Loras' shoulder. Gasps and shrieks rose from the stands. Joffrey leapt to his feet in the royal box. But Ned, instinctively, reached for the sword at his side, though he was too far to intervene on the field. Suddenly, a shape barreled between Gregor and Loras. It was the Hound. Sandor Clegane lunged forward, intercepting Gregor's swing with his own blade. Sparks flew on impact. The Hound's scarred face was tight with tension, yet there was something resolute in his stance. He snarled at his older brother, stepping in to protect Loras. Gregor bellowed in rage and swung again. Sandor met him blow for blow, refusing to yield ground. Steel rang out in a deadly chorus, the two brothers locked in savage combat. The onlookers could only watch in stunned horror, uncertain whether this was madness or some twisted family reckoning. Ned sprang to his feet. "Stop them!" he shouted, motioning to any guards within earshot. But the swirling danger on the field made them hesitate, uncertain how to break up two heavily armored men locked in lethal battle. At last, Gregor lifted his sword high for a crushing overhead strike. The Hound dropped to one knee, meeting it with an angled parry that wrenched Gregor's arms aside. For an instant, Sandor had an opening. He could have driven his sword into Gregor's chest. Instead, he merely shoved his brother back. Gregor stumbled, chest heaving. Then Joffrey's voice rang out from the stands, sharp and commanding in that moment of chaos. "Sandor, leave him be, that's an order." The Hound froze, sword half raised. Gregor glared, hate filling his eyes. But Sandor took a step back, shoulders tense. The entire assembly held its breath, waiting to see if Gregor would renew his attack. For a moment, Ned feared the mountain might ignore the king's command. Then Gregor emitted a guttural snarl, flung down his sword and stormed away, shoving past horrified onlookers. The hush that fell was deeper than any Ned had heard since coming to King's Landing. The hound drew a ragged breath, lowered his sword, and fixed his gaze on the ground, as if in shame or relief. Loras Tyrell, still astride his trembling mare, tried to steady himself. Bit by bit, the tension eased. Ned exhaled, heart pounding. Sansa had both hands pressed to her mouth, eyes wide. Arya looked more fascinated than frightened, as though she'd just witnessed a real battle. Joffrey finally lowered his arm and sank into his seat, color still high in his cheeks. Someone in the stands began to clap, tentatively at first, then more joined in. Nervous cheers rose. Sir Loras slid from his saddle, breathing hard, and approached the hound. He knelt, as if in reverence. "You saved my life," he said in a voice that carried across the field. Then he offered Sandor his victor's laurel, the wreath of flowers meant for the champion. "I owe you a debt." Sandor stared at it, expression unreadable. Then he barked, "Spare me the flowers, boy," and turned away. Despite that, the crowd roared in praise. In their eyes, both men stood as heroes. One for unseating the mountain, the other for preventing murder. The tumult rolled through the stands. Ned saw Mace Tyrell beaming in relief that his prized knight wasn't chopped in half. Joffrey, though red-faced, forced a grin and cried out, "Well done, Sir Loras. Your champion is found." The court herald hesitated, then declared Loras Tyrell the winner of the day's joust. Applause thundered once more, though an uneasy undercurrent lingered. Ned realized his hands were gripping the wooden railing so hard his knuckles went white. He eased back, casting a glance at Cersei. Her face was a mask, though her eyes glinted with barely suppressed anger. Gregor was a Lannister bannerman after all, and he had just nearly caused a catastrophic incident before the entire realm. Ned suspected she would not soon forget or forgive this embarrassment. Joffrey, for his part, seemed torn between praising the hound for obedience and seething that Gregor had lost. At length, Joffrey cleared his throat and beckoned Sansa forward. The ceremony to crown the champion must continue. Hesitant, Sansa descended the steps onto the field, with 2 guards in tow to keep the throng from crushing her. Loras knelt before her, helmet cradled in one arm. He offered a charming, albeit slightly ragged smile. Sansa blushed furiously, but managed to place a fresh wreath upon his curls. "You are the champion, Sir Loras," she said, voice trembling. "We honor your skill and your bravery." Loras inclined his head, soaking in the adoration of the crowd. With that, the final event of the tournament came to a close in a swirl of conflicting emotions. Trumpets blared to signal the end of formal proceedings. People began to stir, some still murmuring about Gregor's rampage, others eager to celebrate the Knight of Flowers' victory. Ned guided his daughters back to the carriages, the hush of tension still prickling at the edges of his mind. That had been too close to a true tragedy. If the hound hadn't intervened, Loras might have been cut down in front of thousands. And who knew what chaos would follow from a murder so public? While the stands emptied, Ned took aside a pair of the City Watch and ordered them to discover Gregor's whereabouts. "Take a dozen men if needed," Ned said quietly. "I want to know where he lodges. Report back." They nodded and hurried off, leaving Ned in uneasy reflection. The realm could not allow such an incident to pass without consequence. Yet Gregor was favored by the Lannisters, and Tywin's wrath would be fearsome if Ned attempted to arrest Gregor without solid authority. The entire city might erupt. He walked back with Sansa and Arya in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. When they reached the Red Keep, servants ushered them inside. The corridors were abuzz with talk of the day's events. Rumors flew. Some claimed Gregor had stormed off to the Westerlands in a blind rage. Others insisted he was holed up in a wine-soaked fury in the city's outskirts. Still others gossiped that the king might knight the hound for his courage, though Ned had his doubts. Joffrey was fickle in his affections. In the safety of his solar, Ned sank into a chair and rubbed his temples. Littlefinger arrived unannounced not an hour later, waltzing through the door with his usual smirk. He took one look at Ned's face and clucked his tongue. "Oh dear, quite a performance from the mountain, wasn't it? I suspect the songs will call it the day Sir Gregor tried to chop a Tyrell in half." Ned shot him a sharp look. Was there a purpose to your visit, Lord Baelish? Littlefinger spread his hands, feigning injury. Must a man have a purpose to visit his good friend the Lord Protector? I merely wished to see if you planned to punish Sir Gregor for his outburst. The laws might consider it attempted murder after all. Ned grimaced. You and I both know the man's guilty of worse crimes than this, but bringing him to justice could provoke Lord Tywin. The realm is on a knife's edge already. If we move too rashly, war could ignite. Littlefinger walked to the window, peering out at the city. But if we do nothing, what message does that send? That the Crown tolerates savage attacks even in its own tournament. It might embolden others. Ned exhaled. I know. I'm caught between inaction and a spark that could set the realm ablaze. He looked up at the other man. Unless you have a clever plan to handle Gregor without rousing the lion. Littlefinger gave an insouciant shrug. My talents lean more toward coin and persuasion than capturing rampaging knights. If you do decide to make a move, you'll need men loyal to you, ones who want desert at the sight of Tywin's gold. For that you might look to the north, or perhaps some of the river lords. But that is your domain, Lord Stark. His eyes glinted with mild amusement. I only caution you that no one admires a powerless regent. With that, he offered a mocking bow and departed, leaving Ned alone with his thoughts once more. The man had a knack for delivering truths in the most irritating way. Still, Ned could not deny there was truth in what he said. If the crown showed weakness, it risked losing the respect of the realm. Yet, if the crown moved against a Lannister bannerman, it might face open war. Weighing each side felt like balancing on a dagger's point. Evening came, though the city still buzzed with energy from the day's spectacle. Fires and torches lit the streets. Merrymakers drank in the taverns, celebrating or bemoaning their lost wagers. Joffrey had retired to his quarters in a foul mood, complaining that Gregor's incompetence had cast a pall on the entire tournament. Cersei, too, had withdrawn, presumably to plan her next move with whichever Lannister advisors still lingered in the castle. Ned used the quiet to gather some of his most trusted men, Tomard, Allen, Hallis Mullen, and speak with them about the city's readiness. Should Gregor reappear, they must be prepared. He also paid a visit to Sir Barristan Selmy. The Lord Commander of the Kingsguard stood vigil near the royal apartments, his white cloak faintly glowing in the torchlight. Ned approached him cautiously, not wanting to disturb. Barristan, noticing him, bowed respectfully. Lord Protector. It's been quite a day. Ned nodded. I'm sorry we couldn't speak sooner. You saw what happened with Gregor. I fear there will be repercussions. As Lord Commander, what's your assessment? Barristan's face was grave. A knight who behaves so violently at a royal tourney is no true knight. His vow to protect the weak was cast aside in an instant. A vile display, my lord. Vanderum? I agree, but the question is, what do we do about it? Barristan exhaled, his eyes flicking to the heavy oaken door beyond which Joffrey slept. In the days of old, such a crime would be answered by the king himself. Gregor would be summoned to account for his actions or face justice. Now, that depends on the king's mother, and I suspect, on you. Ned felt the familiar weight settle on his shoulders. It does, and neither path is simple. No, Barristan said softly, but sometimes there is no simple path. If we allow men like Gregor Clegane to roam free without consequence, we sow the seeds of lawlessness. Yet if we strike at him, the Lannisters might call it a provocation. We stand at a crossroads, and I fear which road we choose could shape the realm for years. Nandini. Ned placed a hand on the old knight's shoulder, grateful for his candor. Thank you, Sir Barristan. I'll keep your counsel in mind. He parted from the Kingsguard commander and walked alone through the corridors, eventually finding his way to a small balcony that overlooked the city. The moon was high now, illuminating the rooftops and winding streets. From somewhere in the distance came the strains of a bard's lute, interspersed with boisterous laughter. The city was celebrating the end of the tournament, blissfully ignorant of the dangers simmering beneath the surface. In the courtyard below, the gold cloaks marched on their rounds, lanterns swinging in the gloom. Ned leaned against the stone balustrade, arms folded. His mind drifted to thoughts of the north. He pictured Winterfell again, the snow, the ancient walls. In the north, justice was straightforward. If a man committed a crime, the lord or head of the house would mete out punishment swiftly. Here in King's Landing, every act carried the potential for political backlash. Yet Ned was no mere bystander. He bore the responsibility to uphold the crown's law. If he hesitated, others might sense weakness. At length, he left the balcony and ascended a winding stair to the rookery, where the castle's ravens perched in wooden cages. The maester's assistant on duty bowed, startled to see him at such an hour. Ned asked for parchment, quill and wax, then penned a letter to Lord Tywin Lannister at Casterly Rock, calling on him to discipline his bannermen, and requesting that Sir Gregor present himself at court to answer for the violence at the tourney. He kept the tone polite but firm, emphasizing that the realm's peace demanded accountability. He left enough ambiguity to allow Tywin some maneuver, hoping to avoid a direct challenge that would force Tywin's hand. He read the letter twice, sealed it with the direwolf sigil, and handed it to the assistant. "Have this dispatched before dawn," he said. The young man bowed, promising to do so. Ned lingered, feeling the brisk night air swirl through the tower windows. He prayed he had not just lit the fuse of war. But ignoring Gregor's outrage was impossible. When he finally returned to his chamber, the hour was late. A candle guttered on the small table, half melted. He sat heavily on the edge of the bed, removing his boots and loosening his collar. Just as he prepared to snuff out the candle, there came a soft knock at the door. Alarmed, he stood and moved to open it. Varys, the master of whisperers, slipped inside, gliding like a shadow in his voluminous robes. His expression was unusually sober. "My Lord Protector," he said quietly, "forgive the lateness. I bring news." Ned motioned him further in. "Speak." Varys folded his hands. "Sir Gregor Clegane is said to have ridden out of the city by the western gate. He carried little except his armor and a handful of men. No one tried to stop him. Some report he was raging about vengeance, but it's unclear what he intends. A few claim he's headed for his keep in the mountains, or perhaps further." "No." Ned felt a measure of relief. "So, at least he's not prowling the streets. That's something." Varys inclined his head. "Indeed, but I would caution you that if he receives instructions from Casterly Rock, he may return with more men. He might even ravage the countryside out of spite. We should be prepared." Ned nodded, posture stiff. "I have already sent a letter to Lord Tywin, demanding Gregor answer for his crimes. We'll see how he replies." Varys' mouth pressed into a thin line. "I fear we might see retribution from the Lannisters. They may deny your demand, claiming the event was provoked or some such nonsense. Cersei, I suspect, will not be pleased that you took it upon yourself to summon one of her father's bannermen." "It had to be done," Ned said, resolute. "We either enforce the law or we don't." Varys studied him with that enigmatic tilt of the head. "You are an honorable man, Lord Stark. I only pray that the realm will not bleed for it." He offered a small bow and slipped away as silently as he had come. Alone again, Ned extinguished the candle. The chamber fell into darkness. He sank onto the bed and let his eyes close, exhaustion creeping through every muscle. Sleep came slowly, haunted by the image of Gregor's sword crashing down and the hound's desperate intervention. Even in his dreams, the clang of steel echoed. He woke to birdsong and a streak of sunlight crossing the floor, feeling as though he had hardly rested. The memory of the day before rushed back like a tide. But duty beckoned, and so he rose, splashing water on his face at the wash basin. Over breakfast, a simple meal of bread and fruit, he listened to Tomarad's nightly report. No sign of Gregor, though rumors flew among the soldiers. The city was returning to normal after the tournament's end. It might take days for the visiting lords to depart, funneling coin and gossip back to their own lands. That morning's small council meeting was tense. Joffrey sat in Robert's old seat, absent-mindedly flicking a dagger against the arm of the chair. Cersei took her place at his side, wearing an expression of studied neutrality. Varys, Littlefinger, Pycelle, and Sir Barristan were present as well. The matter of Sir Gregor was inevitably raised by Ned. I have sent word to Lord Tywin, Ned said calmly, requesting Gregor present himself for questioning. Joffrey made a face. Why should my grandfather trouble himself? Sir Gregor was provoked by that Tyrell pup and his foul trick with the mare. I see no reason to coddle House Tyrell. Ned clenched his jaw, careful to maintain respect. Your Grace, the violence in front of thousands of spectators cannot be dismissed as a mere outburst. Sir Gregor would have slain a knight on the tourney field had it not been for your sworn shield. If we allow that to go unchallenged, it sets a dire precedent. Jan. Cersei placed a hand on her son's arm, offering Ned a cool smile. Lord Stark, I share your concern for order. But Gregor has left the city, and the tourney is concluded. Perhaps we should let these matters rest. Already the small folk cling to rumors of war. Ned did not waver. Your Grace, the small folk cling to rumors because they see no justice done when powerful men break the law. We must reassure them that the crown does not ignore such offenses. Nim. Cersei's eyes narrowed slightly, but she spoke in a measured tone. We do not ignore them, but we weigh them carefully. I caution you against rash action. Lord Tywin might view a summons as an affront if it is not couched in proper courtesy. Ned took a breath. I have been courteous, sending him a polite missive asking for Gregor's presence. If that request is spurned, then we shall see what must be done. Littlefinger raised an eyebrow. And if Tywin instructs Gregor to remain in the Westerlands, will you march the city watch to fetch him? The watch is not large enough to face Lord Tywin's men, I'd wager. Nay. Silence weighed heavily. Cersei surveyed Ned with a slight tilt of her head, as if testing how far she could push him. Joffrey looked bored, flicking the dagger tip against the wood. Varys cleared his throat, breaking the silence. Perhaps a measured approach is wise, my lord. Let us await Lord Tywin's reply. In the meantime, we can monitor the highways for any sign of Gregor or his men causing havoc. Ned inclined his head to Varys. Agreed. But the moment we have word of Gregor's movements, we must act. The king's peace cannot be trampled. Daddy. The meeting continued with other matters, finances from the tourney, upcoming celebrations, the distribution of leftover grain from festival stalls. Ned attended to them mechanically, though his mind was still turning over the question of how Tywin would react. When the meeting ended, Joffrey departed in a swirl of self-importance, Cersei trailing after him. Ned watched them go, steeling himself. Each day, he felt the cracks widening beneath the veneer of peace. Outside the council chamber, Ser Barristan approached. A moment, Lord Stark. Oh, of course. Barristan walked with Ned down a quieter corridor. I wanted you to know that the men respect your stance. Many of us saw Gregor's fury firsthand, and we would not have it unleashed on the innocent. If you need loyal swords, you can call on me. Ned placed a hand on Barristan's shoulder, grateful. Your support is worth more than you know, Sir Barristan. I only pray it doesn't come to a violent standoff. The realm has bled enough. Barristan's eyes held a sadness born of many years in service. Kings always speak of peace, yet so often it slips through our fingers. But I'll stand by my oath, Lord Stark. Ned thanked him, then returned to the tasks of governance, seeing to the details of men leaving the city, settling accounts with merchants, ensuring the small folk who had traveled for the tourney could depart without incident. The day passed in a blur of such necessities, with an undercurrent of anxious waiting for Tywin Lannister's response. By sunset, Ned found himself again in the presence of his daughters, sharing a quiet dinner in their chambers. Arya nibbled on roast chicken, looking contemplative. Sansa poked at her plate, occasionally glancing at the door as if expecting Joffrey to appear. She had been oddly silent since the final day of the tournament, perhaps unsettled by how near death had come for Sir Loras. Ned asked how they fared, but neither had much to say. After the meal, Sansa lingered, twisting her hands together. Father, do you think they'll punish Sir Gregor? Ned placed a hand gently atop hers. That remains to be seen, sweetling. We're waiting for word from Lord Tywin. She bit her lip. Joffrey said that sometimes men need to fear a knight's wrath to know their place. He said if a knight is strong enough, the realm should bow. Is that true? Ned's stomach turned at those words. He squeezed her hand. That is not the way of honorable men. A knight's duty is to protect, not to terrorize. Don't let Joffrey's words trouble you." Sansa nodded, though she still looked uncertain. Arya listened from across the room, silent but watchful. Ned offered a reassuring smile to them both, then excused himself, urging them to rest. Darkness had fallen, and he still had letters to compose. He wanted to reach out to old friends in the Riverlands, men he could trust to keep watch for Gregor if the Mountain ventured that way. He settled in his solar, quill in hand, and wrote by candlelight, forging slow but steady lines. "To Lord Hoster Tully, greetings from the Lord Protector in King's Landing." So the words went. He explained the situation with care, refraining from accusations, but warning that Gregor might seek to harass the Riverlands if Tywin planned to send him forth. He asked for vigilance and caution. When he had finished, he folded and sealed the parchment, then penned another to Lord Blackwood, another to Lord Vance. By the time he was done, the candle had guttered low. He leaned back, letting the tension seep from his shoulders. The day had been long, the future uncertain. Yet for now the city was quiet, lulled by the feast days after the tournament. Ned rose, blew out the candle, and stepped onto the narrow balcony. 1,000 lights glittered in the streets below. Somewhere, a lute played a plaintive tune. The air smelled faintly of smoke and the salt of the Blackwater Bay. He found himself thinking of his father's words once more. Winter is coming. The realm was poised at the edge of that truth, whether it knew it or not. He breathed in the night, feeling the weight of the crown's burden pressing on him like unseen chains. At least tomorrow might bring fresh tidings. Whether good or ill, he could not guess. He offered a silent prayer to the old gods that no matter what threat came, he would have the strength to meet it without sacrificing his honor. His daughters needed him, the realm needed him, and though he had never asked for this role, he would not abandon it now. Duty and honor were the twin pillars that held him upright, and so long as he could stand, he would bear that weight for Robert's sake, for his family's sake, and for the sake of the 7 kingdoms that clung so precariously to peace.